This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Ghannam.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, we're back from a short break. We have a fantastic show today, and we're going to be covering a lot of topics to keep everybody up to date on what's happening around the world, especially in Palestine. There's kind of big news from the U.S. Congress that we're going to be covering. Top progressive Democrats announced that they will boycott the Israeli President Herzog, who's coming to a joint session of Congress to give a speech. It's kind of a big deal. You know, usually when this happens, everybody gets on board because both houses, everybody comes, Democrats, Republicans, and they usually celebrate the prime minister or the president. This time, progressive Democrats are boycotting. We're going to talk about that. Unfortunately, and we're not too surprised, but we're going to be covering the Israeli acquittal of a murderer, the murder of Iyad al-Halik. He is an autistic Palestinian young man who was murdered by an Israeli border police officer, and we finally have his name. We're going to be talking about that injustice, yet another injustice in the murder of a young Palestinian man. And then, I hate to admit it, Jamal, but, we're ramping up to the presidential elections here in the United States, 2024, even though it's 2023. And there's a lot of really out there people who are running. We're going to be talking about one in particular, and that's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He's made some really kind of crazy comments. We're going to kind of be talking about that. But before we get to all that, of course, we're going to really pay attention to this important interview you did with Eric Axelman and Sam Eilertsen, who are co-directors of a new documentary called Israelism, and it follows the evolution of the beliefs of two American Jews and how their support for the apartheid state has changed once they experienced the reality on the ground of occupation and the oppression of Palestinians. So it's kind of an interesting documentary. You interviewed both co-directors. We should really pay attention. That's kind of interesting.
It's very interesting. And the film is coming to the Bay Area. It's going to be at the Jewish Film Festival, and I'll make the announcement about the date and where to go. So pay attention to this interview. It's a great film. I highly recommend it for our listeners and viewers in the Bay Area to grab this opportunity and go and watch it. A generational divide is growing among American Jews regarding the centrality of Israel to the Jewish identity. Increasingly, young Jewish community members are discovering that key narratives about Israel's creation and existence that they were taught in synagogues and Hebrew schools growing up are false. Israelism, a newly released documentary, follows the evolution of the beliefs of two young American Jews. Their unquestioning support of Israel gradually erodes as they become increasingly aware that the Zionist State is based on the past and ongoing occupation and oppression of Palestinians. The Jewish Film Festival will screen it Thursday, July 27th at the Vogue Theater in San Francisco and Sunday, August 6th at the Piedmont Theater as part of the Jewish Film Festival. Joining us on Arab Talk this week is Eric Axelman and Sam Eilertsen. They are both founders of Tikkun Olam Productions, a nonprofit filmmaking collective focusing on documenting and supporting movements for justice. They are the co-directors of Israelism. Welcome to Arab Talk, Eric and Sam.
Thank you so much for having us. Yeah, really, really appreciate it. And we're so excited to bring the film to San Francisco and the Bay Area. And we really appreciate you having us on.
So let me start with you, Eric. Just give us a synopsis of the two protagonists, Eitan and Simone Zimmerman. What is their background and how were they involved in supporting Israel in their younger lives?
Yeah, so our two main characters, Simone Zimmerman and Eitan, are American Jews who, like many American Jews, grew up in communities where not only the Jewish religion is central, obviously, but Israel itself is actually kind of a center part of their childhood, and Israel is really kind of framed as a central, if not the central part of modern Judaism. And a lot of American Jews, not all American Jews, but a lot of American Jews grow up with this kind of narrative that Israel is kind of a center part of not only the Jewish religion, but also of our Jewish identities. And supporting Israel, so supporting Israel politically, is seen as a key part of what it means to be a Jew in the 21st century. And so both Simone and Eitan, Simone grows up in LA, and Eitan grows up in Georgia, near Atlanta. And both of them, again, essentially are told by their teachers and their mentors that it is key to defend Israel from essentially the lies that other people across the country and across the world are telling about Israel, that Israel's an apartheid state, or that Israel ethnically cleansed the Palestinians in 1948. And so they really grow up with this idea that Israel is kind of under attack, both physically as well as in terms of arguments in the U.S. And they see it as really their role and a major point in their life to defend Israel at all costs. So Simone goes to UC Berkeley and becomes an Israel advocate. And Eitan actually takes a step further. And in many of our Jewish communities across the U.S., the Israeli military is seen as this, unbelievably kind of heroic institution, and Israeli soldiers are idolized in a pretty profound way. When I was in college, I would realize that many of my friends, I would look at their Facebook photos and see, themselves as really young kids. So seeing my friends as really young kids, hanging around Israeli soldiers and just beaming and just kind of worshiping these Israeli soldiers. And it's seen as a really amazing thing to do, to join the Israeli military, even if you're an American. And so Eitan actually joins the Israeli military. And he quickly, is deployed to the West Bank, and very quickly realizes that he's actually, essentially enforcing a system of apartheid. Right? He's placed in And Simone, again, comes into contact with Palestinians and Palestinian narratives at UC Berkeley. And so both of them kind of pretty quickly realize that they are kind of supporting a state that, unfortunately, again, is committing apartheid against the Palestinians, and also has a long history of incredible oppression against the Palestinians. And so seeing that and kind of seeing their awakening causes them to transform in a pretty profound way. That's happening not only to them, but it's happening across the American Jewish community in a pretty profound way.
Sam, I mean, this is an excellent introduction, Eric. But Sam, I knew Jewish Americans served in the Israeli army, but the film brings to the forefront how even from an early age, as you mentioned, there is the soft recruitment of young American Jews as key part of supporting Israel. Talk about this soft recruitment.
Yeah, and Eric and I are both Jewish, but we didn't quite grow up in these sort of communities that are, where Israel is part of everything. So I think it was interesting for us to learn more about it. But yeah, I think like Jewish day schools, Jewish summer camps. We in the film you'll see like we have all this footage of young kids marching around with Israeli flags and every class or a lot of classes kind of incorporate Israel in Jewish day schools and Jewish summer camps. And summer camps will often have soldiers come and act as camp counselors or former soldiers. There's also obviously Birthright, with a huge program that brings young American Jews on free trips to Israel and gives them a very sort of indoctrinating, one-sided perspective, and sort of just tries to. And the thing that actually really struck me is that it wasn't just that it was a one-sided narrative, but the story that a lot of protagonists that like Simone and Eitan that we interviewed told, they actually were like Palestinians were entirely erased. Like Simone said she went to college not even really understanding what a settlement was. Not understanding. Both of them said they didn't really understand who Palestinians were, other than like quote people who wanted to kill Jews. Like just this very extremely bigoted way of thinking about the Palestinians and the conflict. So yeah, it's kind of incorporated in it. And to be clear, this isn't every single Jewish community. There are some that are much less focused on Israel, particularly these days, as more folks in the community grow, uncomfortable with the role of the way the Israeli government behaves and the role that it plays in the community. But in a lot of mainstream Jewish communities, everything from like, the weekly services at synagogues, or the classes you take in school will all incorporate Israel in some way. Just in this place that is so wonderful and the ultimate fulfillment of the Jewish people's destiny, etc.
Eric, can you explain Itan's camp experience in the film, and Simone's what referred to as military light activity when she was in Israel? How it was made to seem like a cool and fun activity.
Yeah. So one of the main characters, Eitan, describes a relatively common experience in a lot of Jewish summer camps. And again, not every Jewish summer camp, but a lot of Jewish summer camps, essentially, again, a lot of the counselors are Israelis, and many of them are either current or past Israeli soldiers. And they often do military games, so essentially military exercises with relatively young kids. And again, in some ways, kind of similar to ROTC in America. And again, in many ways, America indoctrinates young people to join the military as well. The American military, so in some ways, it's not that dissimilar, equally disturbing. But yeah, so they, oftentimes play, Israeli military games with, Israelis, kind of counselors giving, Israeli military commands. And it's seen as kind of this exciting thing as a young kid, right? When you're a young kid, your kind of mentors, your camp counselors are doing this and kind of telling you that this is a really important thing and that we're doing this to defend our country and to defend our homeland. And when you're a young, impressionable kid, it makes you kind of think that this is a really important thing to do. And Simone describes, this is pretty common when a lot of young American Jews take organized trips to Israel, there's pretty frequently military components of it where you can spend time on an Israeli military base, essentially doing Israeli military boot camp. And so we have a lot of footage in the film that was released either by Creative Commons or footage that we're able to use through fair use of American Jewish kids, teenagers playing, essentially doing Israeli boot camp in Israel with Israeli soldiers. And Simone describes the fact that about 10% of her graduating class of her Jewish high school in LA, in Los Angeles, joined the Israeli military.
Wow.
And that's pretty wild. And again, that is an extreme. Again, I've never heard of a high school having that many kids join the Israeli military, but it happened. And again, when I went to college, I met, people who, American Jews who just got back from the Israeli military. And again, I didn't grow up in exactly that kind of environment, but I began to realize that this glorification of the Israeli military in a lot of our culture has very serious ramifications in the fact that we're getting very young, impressionable kids to not only join a foreign military, but to join a foreign military that is very literally enforcing a system of apartheid, and just the great tragedy of that. Not only for obviously the kids who are doing it, but obviously the Palestinians who have to bear the brunt of that apartheid. And so we really wanted to go into that in our film and really show that. And we also show a Hillel educator at the University of Yukon who was very similar to the Hillel educators at my college when I went there, openly talking about how wonderful it is that many of the young people she's taught have joined the Israeli military, and kind of bragging about all the kids that she has helped join the Israeli military. And I think that's something that, our community has to really come to terms with and really think very seriously about what we're, encouraging very young, impressionable kids to do.
The film states that 60,000 of the 450,000 in the Israeli military are Americans, and of course,
that's settlers in West Bank. So that's American Jewish settlers, I believe. I'm sorry about that.
Out of the American Jewish settlers. I mean, this is a very high number. I mean, aside from all what is referred to as Hasbara or propaganda and the excitement, because you had a great opening where you're showing, handsome Israelis and good-looking, young people and dancing and like it's a rock concert. It makes it very exciting. But is there anything thought about the danger that goes with this?
That's a great question. I mean, I think, and Sam can talk about this in a second as well. I think there's a growing realization within our community that, this, very one-sided narrative that, makes Israel just seem like this, kind of rock star nation, this incredibly kind of attractive place that's just kind of fun and kind of the culmination of our people's dreams, is very dangerous because it simply doesn't reflect the actual reality in any kind of way. and encourages many of our young people to support Israel unconditionally. And when we actually find out what Israel actually is, again, Israel is very similar to America in many ways. Our histories are actually very similar in that, it started out with, one people displacing another people, but also trying to claim that it's a liberal democracy. And I think luckily in America, we can realize that our history is tragic and that we have caused, unbelievable suffering to people who lived here before. And I think it's time for American Jews and Israelis to recognize that Israel has a very similar history and that we need to come to terms with the great suffering that the state of Israel has caused the Palestinian people to face.
It's the price of settler colonialism. I mean, when you talk about America, Canada, or many countries in Africa and so forth. Let's go back to the main characters. Ivan and Simone, later on, they became increasingly aware of what is really going on. Simone began speaking out in the United States about the reality of Israeli occupation and settlement of Palestinian land. Many American Jews supported her, but there was a lot of hate and vitriol as well. Sam, talk about her role as Bernie Sanders' Jewish outreach coordinator in his 2016 presidential bid.
Yeah, it's quite a story. So, first of all, within the film, one of the folks we interviewed who sort of represents, in some ways, an antagonist in the film is Abe Foxman, former director of the Anti-Defamation League, who, directed what originally was intended to be sort of a civil rights organization protecting American Jews from anti-Semitism, and it did play an important role doing that, back in the 50s and 60s when there was institutional discrimination against Jews, and continues to do that to some extent, but largely has become an organization that attacks critics of Israel, calls them anti-Semites, et cetera, et cetera. So I say that because this is where his story intersects with Simone's. So Simone was offered the job of being a Jewish outreach coordinator for Bernie Sanders in 2016. And to be clear, Bernie Sanders has been really, more than anyone else in any kind of quote, mainstream American politics, willing to criticize Israel and stand up for Palestinian rights. So overall, his record on this, I would say, is very good, and he's had a very positive role in sort of moving the conversation. But in this particular place, he sort of caved to pressure. So Simone was, given this job, and within a week or so, reporters started writing articles, digging up her past criticisms of Benjamin Netanyahu and of the Jewish community in America's relationship with Israel. She was a co-founder of an organization called If Not Now, which is sort of a movement of young Jews calling out the community's support of the occupation and the Israeli government. And so journalists, dug up old Facebook posts where she, said the F word to Netanyahu and things like that, and used it to smear her. And it ended up in the New York Times. And Abe Foxman, who had just recently retired, came out and called for her to be fired from the campaign. And that's exactly what happened, unfortunately.
I was kind of disappointed with Bernie Sanders. I mean, to tell you the truth, it was a surprise. Let's put it this way. It was a surprise to me that he succumbed basically to AIPAC. When you talk about Abe Foxman came out of retirement and contacted him basically to fire her.
Yeah, and
it was death.
Well, I was just going to say, I think, in some ways, people talk about, people on the right complain about quote unquote cancel culture, but there's no more intense cancel culture than what, the pro-Israel lobby tries to do to anyone who criticizes them or criticizes the Israeli government. It definitely, the fact that happened in 2016 definitely speaks to the fact that even Bernie felt like he couldn't stand up to that or didn't want that kind of publicity. I think the fact that now you have folks like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in Congress, who obviously have also endured immense amounts of that basic attacks, but the fact that Bernie in 2020, people from the parochial community criticized him for, basically accepting their endorsements and using them as spokespeople, and kind of told them to go away. So I think he would have caved less to pressure in 2020. I think things are moving in a positive direction because of the work of leaders like some of these folks in Congress and the squad who sort of push the envelope on the issue.
Eric, Eitan was deeply affected and disillusioned about his experience in the IDF. Explain how it was a moral reckoning for him.
Yeah, and I think for many young American Jews, right, they know nothing. They're kind of they grow up. We grew up in this world in which Israel can do no wrong. Israel is this only democracy in the Middle East. That's the kind of narrative that we're told. And Eitan, again, as a very young person, I think it's important to know how young American Jews are when they join the Israeli military, if they do. Now, these are 18, 19-year-old. These are kids. These are really young. These are kids. And so when Eitan is serving the Israeli military, he both, witnesses kind of just the every day-to-day kind of system of apartheid that denies Palestinians very basic rights. And he also witnesses very specific, pretty unconscionable brutality towards specific Palestinians. So he recounts a story in which he is on a military base near Hawara, which has, the place of where Israeli settlers have had pogroms recently. And he's told to pick up this young Palestinian detainee. He isn't told anything about him, just told pick up this detainee, bring him back to the military base. So he goes and he gets the Palestinian detainee, who's blindfolded with his hands tied behind his back. He's a very young man, in his early 20s at most. Brings him back to the base. And then right outside the base, these other Israeli soldiers just grab the Palestinian detainee from him, throw him to the ground, and start violently kicking him over and over again for multiple minutes. And Eitan is just sitting there watching. This is, he's 18 years old. This is one of the first things. He was just thrown into the occupation. And his commanding officer is just watching and not saying anything. And a military police officer is just smoking a cigarette, watching, doing nothing. And Eitan is just kind of frozen and wants to say something, but his commanding officer isn't saying anything. And the military police officer isn't saying anything. So what's he supposed to do? And he ultimately doesn't say anything. And they later then they just bring the detainee into the base, and he never sees him again. And so that is a major moment for him in recognizing that something is very deeply wrong here. But from what he recounts, it still took him, many years after he left the military to realize that not only obviously he realized that was wrong in the beginning, but it takes him a long time to realize that just the things he did on the every day to day, just manning checkpoints, patrolling villages, that in and of itself was immoral, and that in and of itself is apartheid. And that, again, a military occupation in which, one population has the full rights, they have the freedom of speech, they can vote in elections, and the other population has no basic civil rights, and they can be detained for any reason by any 18-year-old Israeli soldier. It's a system of apartheid. And so it takes him a while to recognize that, but to his credit, he does. And there's enough American Jews who've both joined the Israeli military and also realize that they are enforcing a system of apartheid, that there's now like a breaking the silence group of American Jews who are speaking out against, the community that really encouraged them to do this. And I think it's tragic that our community encourages, very young, impressionable people to do this. But I'm glad that people are speaking up and saying that, that this is enough and that we can't support this anymore.
I remember interviewing the co-founder of Breaking the Silence, Shavrim Shtika, and he recounted his experience. That there was like this kind of turning point in someone's life, and for him was when he was assigned to Hebron, and then his commander told him just to shoot what he referred to the mikla, which is, I think it's like a RBJ weapon, and he said, where? And he said, just shoot, don't ask me questions. And then he realized that he's just like, looking at Hebron, if so crowded that he was just gonna kill or injure someone he was innocent and didn't know. And then and that was the turning point for him to basically start that organization after he left.
Break the Silence. I've personally seen Breaking the Silence impact a lot of young American Jews. When I was a student at Brown, I was part of a student group that brought Breaking the Silence to my campus, and other groups also brought Breaking the Silence. And I think because a lot of American Jews kind of venerate and glorify Israelis in general, I think a lot of Americans in general, American Jews were kind of taught that Israeli culture and Israeli society is this amazing thing that we should venerate. Actually seeing Israelis themselves talk about the brutality of the occupation and talk about this system of apartheid is very impactful for a lot of young American Jews. And so, yeah, and, I think their work can be very impactful, and seeing them talk and seeing, we actually met Eitan, seeing him actually at an American Breaking the Silence event, speaking publicly about his experiences, and it's very powerful.
So both of you, you started talking a little bit about you were raised in Jewish household. You weren't, too much into the Israel scene and so forth. However, both of you are well versed on the topic. You realize what's going on. Talk to us about your experience. What brought you together, first of all, that both of you kind of think similarly about the occupation. You call Israel an apartheid state, which is, we used to call it the A word. People, no one wanted to mention the word apartheid, but you freely say that. And you both think alike. What brought you together, and what gave you the idea to start this project?
Yeah, I can start off, and then Sam can join. So I grew up Jewish in rural Maine, actually. So my parents were kind of, hippies who moved to Maine in the 70s and 80s. And my Hebrew school, growing up, I went to a conservative Hebrew school. Actually, Israel was not talked about as a central part of Judaism in my synagogue. We had a kind of older rabbi, and to him it was just kind of Torah, for better or worse. And in some ways, I'm pretty grateful for that. But growing up in rural Maine, being a Jew made me feel different, right? I was one of the only Jewish kids growing up in my area, and I didn't I didn't really find a kind of modern Jewish identity that really related to me. After my bar mitzvah, I got the book Exodus by Leon Uris, which is kind of a kind of traditional, in many ways, kind of the classic kind of pro-Zionist, pro-Israel text. And I read it, and I totally fell in love with Israel. It was a modern kind of Jewish identity that I could relate to in the 21st century. It embodied strength, whereas, again, growing up, it's very difficult to learn about the Holocaust and learn about the immense suffering that Jews have gone through. And so learning about this kind of heroic tale of Jewish kind of, statehood and Jewish peoplehood was incredibly inspiring to me as a young person. And I began reading everything I could about Israel. So it wasn't really forced on me. I kind of discovered Israel myself and totally fell in love. We have Israeli relatives through marriage. I'm actually related to Levi Eshkol, the prime minister who began the occupation. So unfortunately, I have familial ties to that. My senior year of high school, a teacher of mine, I was doing an independent study on the history of Zionism. I wanted to learn more about the history of Zionism, and a non-Palestinian, non-Jewish teacher just gave me a bunch of left-wing Israeli historians and Palestinian historians. And I read these books, and I realized that the narrative that I had fallen in love with, kind of like, again, the traditional American narrative, just did not include the Palestinians as fully equal human beings, and only saw them essentially as an obstacle to the kind of Israeli goals. And I became kind of fascinated in how and why I become so attached to that narrative, and began interested in it. Were other young Jewish people kind of realizing that the narrative that they had learned had a lot of really basic and kind of holes in it. So Sam and I both went to Brown University, and I really began to see all these young Jewish people who had really grown up in similar environments to Simone and Eitan, thinking that Israel was really the cornerstone of their Jewish identity and that they needed to support Israel at all costs. And they came to campus thinking that they would be kind of soldiers for Israel on our campus. But inevitably, they met Palestinians. They met Palestinian students, and they read Palestinian books. And I began seeing them transform very quickly. Some of them, went from, the Students for Israel group to the J Street group or further left very quickly. And seeing that transformation made me realize that my own transformation was happening kind of, across the country in a pretty profound way. And, even the absolute most, diehard pro-Israel students on our campus that I personally knew now do work fighting for Palestinian equal rights. And so seeing that transformation occur before my eyes made me realize that this was a widespread phenomenon. And then I met Sam, and Sam was kind of in a similar political place to me and was an incredible cinematographer. And I had this idea for this documentary, and Sam has been working with me since the very beginning.
And Sam, talk a little bit about yourself and about your experience, but also what led you to Eitan and, the whole idea. How did you formulate the idea and then decide, well, we're going to have these two characters here and have them share their experience.
Yeah, so I grew up a pretty secular Jewish background. Like my family didn't go to synagogue a lot. I didn't go to Jewish day school, and I would say my family represents a pretty wide range, a pretty wide spectrum of views on Israel and Palestine. So I definitely grew up with it always being sort of an argument at family gatherings, but didn't really have a one-sided perspective. If anything, I sort of grew up thinking, oh, well, it's the conflict, both sides have done bad things, blah, blah, blah. I think once I had gone to college, I actually saw, I saw Breaking the Silence Soldier speak, which I don't know if that was your group that brought them to campus or someone else, Eric, but that was very sort of an awakening moment for me, realizing, it's not just like both sides have done bad things, but there is sort of an occupation going on, and there's something profoundly unfair being done to Palestinians. And like Eric, read a lot of history by left-wing Israeli historians and Palestinian historians. Edward Said was very influential for me. And in terms of the documentary, it was Eric sort of had the initial concept of making a film about American Jews' relationship with Israel. And I sort of suggested, well, maybe we should try to interview the founders of, if not now, because they were sort of in the news a lot at the time. They were protesting outside of AIPAC and things like that. So that was how we met Simone. Eitan, I actually met just like, I saw him speak at a Breaking the Silence event in Boston. I went to film it just to film the event and just thought his story was really powerful. And he agreed to do an interview. And to be honest, it took us, this is both of our first documentary as directors. So it took us we worked on it for 7 years. It took us a long time to figure out exactly what the story was, and kind of wrestled with it. And, we interviewed a lot more people than actually made the cut. So it was definitely a learning and discovering process for us.
What about pushback from the community? I know the film is just been released, but you're getting some publicity. Have you? I don't want to ask you. Have you received any hate mail or any threats or something like that?
The Facebook ads aren't great, but try to read those.
Yeah, and again, that's part of it, and we knew that we'd get pushback. We have gotten pushback. We released a viral trailer a little more than a month ago, I think, and which got almost 1 million views, and that's when it kind of came on a lot of people's radar for the first time. So Abe Foxman in the film began attacking us, which is fine. He has obviously the right to do so.
Great publicity.
He attacked us on Twitter as well as and he went on Jewish Broadcasting Service, which is kind of a right-wing kind of small cable and internet show, to attack the film, but also said we sent him the film, but also admitted that he only watched 10 minutes of the film in the show. So we encourage him to watch the entire film. I'm not actually sure he knows everything he says in the film currently, because I don't think he's actually watched it. But yeah, so we did our first university screening at UCLA, and there was a lot of pushback. The professor who hosted us posted on Facebook that I can send you the info, but many organizations and individuals tried to get the event canceled. Many organizations and individuals tried to get him fired just for hosting this film. He's a Jewish professor who just wants to have dialogue about Israel and about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We're going to be announcing a huge national screening tour in about a month. We're going to be doing at least 30 to 40 universities across the country in the fall, and we expect there to be pushback. But that's kind of the point of the film, right? The film talks about that. The film talks about the pushback that young American Jews and American Jews in general get when they're just honest about what's actually happening.
Well, that's actually my next question, because Israel settler violence and right-wing Kahanist extremists are now becoming mainstream, right, in Israel. Yeah. Jewish Americans, particularly younger ones, are increasingly realizing that Israel does not align with their values, Jewish or other. Yet there is a faction who will support Israel at all costs, no matter what. So who do you hope this film will have the most influence on?
Great question. Go ahead, Sam.
Well, yeah, I was going to start by saying, I think it is an awakening moment that we're going through right now, because the Israeli government has become so over the top right wing. And so I think more people are starting to question. And I think, a big part of our audience is Jewish Americans who are sort of somewhere along the journey that Zaman and Eitan ended up on, where they maybe recognize that there's something wrong or something bothering them, but to help them kind of understand the extent of it. Like, it's not just this one bad government, but it's a bad system. So yeah, I think we hope to reach as many, particularly students, as well as go to synagogues and community centers and reach an older audience that's starting to, I think, understand a little bit more what's going on, and also or maybe hearing from their kids who are not so happy with the things they were told in day school and camp. So yeah, I think we're trying to reach as wide an audience as possible, particularly Jewish audience, but also have had great reception to this from Arab and Palestinian audiences, and just from audiences in general.
Yeah, I think one thing, obviously, American Jews are obviously, a major audience of ours. We care, obviously, we're Jewish. We care about this film because we deeply care about our community, and our community has gone through so much incredible suffering, but we don't want to see, our community perpetuate the cycle of violence on another group of people. And so this comes from a place of love, and this also comes from a place of, we don't want our people to be complicit in the oppression of another people, period. And we think it's also, again, relevant for just American audiences in general. And, hopefully this can just be an American story about, Americans coming to terms with what's actually happening in Israel-Palestine. And again, obviously, as you mentioned before, we openly use the word apartheid. It gives us no joy to use the word apartheid. But when you see it, and I've been there many times, when you see it on the ground, that is what it is. And we hope that, again, and we also hope that, we can show Americans that it's critical to both fight for equality and the basic rights of Palestinians, while also fighting against real anti-Semitism in the U.S. and across the world. That anti-Semitism, for the first time in my life, the past 5-6 years, has become something that I worry about very frequently. And again, as part of the kind of surging white nationalism and white supremacy in general, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories are surging in America. And again, for the first, violence towards Jewish Americans has surged in the past 6 years. And so we think it's very important for Americans to realize that you can fight, that fighting for Palestinian rights does not make you anti-Semitic. It's nothing to do with anti-Semitism. But we also need to fight against anti-Semitism. And you can do both. You can fight for Palestinian equality while also fighting for the rights and dignity of all people and wherever we live.
Israelism, it's a great documentary. I recommend our audience to go and watch it. It's going to be at the Jewish Film Festival at Thursday, July 27th, at the Vogue Theater in San Francisco, and Sunday, August 6th, at the Piedmont Theater as part of the Jewish Film Festival. Eric and Sam, thank you for coming on Arab Talk.
Thank you so much
for having us on.
Truly appreciate it, Jamal. And thank you so much for your work.
My pleasure.
Well, that's the voice and the face of both Eric Axelman and Sam Eilertsen, co-directors of this new documentary on Israelism. And it's about the kind of journey of two American Jews whose belief and evolution of their kind of fidelity and love for Israel had changed once they saw the reality on the ground. It's a compelling documentary, it sounds like, Jamal. It sounds like it's really worth looking at.
It's definitely a great documentary, and it's like I mentioned during the interview, it's in the Bay Area, coming soon. And we've had, just, several outspoken, both Israeli Americans or actually Israeli guests, especially young ones, very progressive, who have seen the lies that they've been fed all their lives. And once they, especially those who served in the Israeli occupation army, once they go there and they see, and we've had refuseniks who served there and decided, that's it, I'm not going to do it anymore. Right. And they've become really major advocates and outspoken against apartheid, the occupation. Of course, they are vilified. I mean, this is the worst time, really, sadly, to be in Palestine under a fascist Israeli government bent on basically ethnic cleansing Palestinians. We're seeing that on a daily basis. You have criminals who are running the government, like even by Israeli standards, like Itmar Ben Gvir and Smotrich. I mean, those are really, convicted criminals. They are terrorists, yet they are now holding ministerial positions in the government. Not to say that Benjamin Netanyahu is an angel. He's not. But you thought like when you had Benjamin Netanyahu, you've seen the worst of it. Well, you haven't.
Not even close. Well, that's why this documentary is so important, Jamal, because it's occurring at a time, and it's topical because, just in the last day, Israeli military reservists said that they would strike and refuse to serve the Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu if these judicial reforms continue to go forward, which it looks like they will. And we get nothing but tepid kind of very light, gentle slaps on the wrist by the Biden administration and the EU, despite this really aggressive, as you call it, fascist apartheid regime. And so it's kind of ironic, right? You have the U.S. administration failure to criticize this grotesque, version of the Israeli government, the EU failure, yet you have American Jewish community members who actually go there, see the reality, and are ready to provide kind of a dose of reality. But it seems like our politicians and policymakers in the United States and in Europe are not even paying attention to Jewish voices who say enough is enough.
And I think this documentary should be sent to every congressman, congresswoman, senator, the administration to see, because it seems to me they turn a blind eye to all the atrocities, and they'd rather read press releases from AIPAC and talking points, basically. And that's why this documentary it's so important. So on this topic, Jez, progressive U.S. lawmakers have announced their intentions to boycott Israeli President Isaac Herzog's address to a joint session of Congress, coming up. It started after Congresswoman Ilhan Omar announced that there would be no way in hell she would be in attendance. And of course, they're all attacking her, all the Hasbaristas, everyone, including their
Democrats and Republicans,
surrogates in Congress, attacking her, calling her an anti-Semite for saying, here is a congresswoman who was denied if you remember, with Rashida Tlaib, entry into a country that we give billions and billions and billions of dollars to go visit, because they wanted to go to in a real fact-finding mission. In other words, on a mission without not being held hands and driven to Hasbara people to avoid talking to Palestinians, and they denied them. And so Congressman Jamal Bowman, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Congresswoman Cori Bush of Missouri and Rashida Tlaib also would not be attending. As Representative Cori Bush said, and I'm quoting here, Congress should not be giving a platform to the president of a country that shows no respect for human rights.
That seems very direct and straightforward, Jamal, and it's quite a strong statement. It's an accurate statement, but here we have a handful of progressive Democrats, as you say. It's a very important statement. They're all being attacked. But my question back to you is, in the face of the ethnic cleansing and murder of Palestinians almost every day in historic Palestine, with this attempt now to kind of strip away any semblance, any illusion of democracy in this apartheid state, with international world condemnation of these so-called judicial reforms, why is there a joint session of Congress anyways? And why are these individuals going to be giving a platform to the Israeli president who represents such a grotesque form of totalitarianism in historic Palestine? Why? I mean, there's more going to the story of these individuals who are not going to attend, who are going to boycott, rather than calling out the 400 500 plus others who are going to attend this outrageous speech.
Because it's sickening, yes. Because it's sickening. Sadly, this administration and Congress and the Senate are beholden to the Israeli lobby AIPAC, which should be registered as a foreign agent.
It is a foreign agent.
Actually, I was looking into it, and the first president to call it as a foreign agent or wanted to have it registered as a foreign agent is JFK. And then, of course, he got assassinated. But he was like really bewildered why wasn't AIPAC registered as a foreign agent, and they just decide to turn a blind eye. And in fact, AIPAC now is being aggressive, attacking Ilhan Omar and having its surrogates in Congress. Everyone is jumping on the bandwagon, calling her all. I mean, really the first Muslim African woman in Congress. Imagine,
it's outrageous.
They're going after her. It's not like, just for saying, I don't want to, if she said, I don't want to visit Ireland, nobody would have said anything. They boycotted Modi from India because of their atrocity. No one said anything. But to boycott attending Israel, all of a sudden they're attacking her. I think they are a bunch of hypocrites and Islamophobes to bat, and it's a handful, but it's meaningful. The last time Democrats, and I'm not talking about the whole Congress, the Democratic members of Congress did not attend a speech by an Israeli leader. When did this happen?
No, when?
During President Barack Obama, when Netanyahu bypassed and Congress invited him and criticized because he criticized Barack Obama over his attempts at the time to secure a nuclear agreement with Iran. Nearly 60 Democratic members of Congress did not attend that speech.
Where are they now, Jamal? Where are those 60?
But think about it, even in general. Just think about the humiliation that you have if a foreign leader bypassing the President of the United States gets invited by a joint session of Congress because Obama didn't want to meet with him because he was like going crazy attacking Barack Obama. And then Congress, they invited him and attended. Okay, 60 did not show up to show solidarity with the president. But here you have a handful.
But I'll make it even worse for you, Jamal. This week, when the Biden administration offered this very weak condemnation of the building of 4,500 new illegal colonial settlements in the West Bank and occupied Palestine, you had Ben Gvir and some other of the members of the Knesset basically saying to the president, and we can't repeat this on the air, but to go F himself, to go, you mind his own business. So you have the members of the Knesset telling the president of the United States and the U.S. government to go F themselves, to go mind their own business when they get almost $4 billion a year and military aid from this country, telling them, the people who write the check for these guys, telling them to go F off. It is outrageous that members of Congress are going to celebrate and welcome the president of this apartheid state.
And then people wonder why Israel gets away with murder, gets away with really impunity. Is when you have lawmakers like this who just are willing to give a wink and a nod for Israel to continue its occupation, its ethnic cleansing, its population transfer, and so on, and writing always that $4 billion check year after year. In fact, I think I read something they've increased like $500 million for some new military gear for the Israelis, when then they deny students loan forgiveness. Because they argue over it, and then they stand in the way of young students and want to keep them buried in student loans for the rest of their lives.
Well, that's a good segue, Jamal, to our second topic today, because speaking of Israel getting away with murder, literally, the Israeli border police murdered this young Palestinian autistic boy, Iyad al-Halak, and he was let go. The murderer was not charged with anything.
In front of the poor parents and the crying mother, just in Jerusalem, a Jerusalem court acquitted the border police officer, and they called it of involuntary reckless manslaughter. Okay,
Involuntary reckless manslaughter.
That might be a charge given to a DUI, maybe someone who killed somebody while driving. Okay, and this is for shooting this poor young man. He's autistic.
In cold blood.
He's autistic.
In cold blood.
Yes, he's autistic. His family described him as someone whose comprehension is like a 6-year-old. I mean, he has, and he was going on his way with his, I guess, caregiver on his way to a special educational needs school when he was murdered. And then they said the border policeman told him in Hebrew to stop. Well, his family said his comprehension is 6-year-old and he doesn't speak Hebrew. So I yelled at him to stop, and he went to hiding. He said, I'm with her. This is according to eyewitnesses. And then she was pleading with him, his caregiver. She was pleading with the soldiers, and then they shot him, and now they acquitted him. And you know what Itmar Ben-Gvir, which we mentioned, the Minister of National Security, said, I welcome the acquittal. He was saying, our heroic fighters who go out to defend us and the entire state of Israel will receive a hug and full support from me and the Israeli government. This is his statement.
Yeah, that's right. Welcoming the heroes who murder autistic children.
Yeah,
I mean, that's real, but that's really heroic if you think about it, Jamal. They murder an autistic child, basically, a 6-year-old.
Very vile.
But that's the Israeli definition of heroism. When you murder autistic Palestinian children, you're a hero. That tells you about the current status of the apartheid state, right?
So the unnamed police officer who killed Iyad al-Halak on May 30th, 2020, as a defendant, he was granted anonymity by the court following a request from the Israeli border police. And we know his identity thanks to Richard Silverstein, who is a contributor to this show. So the murderer, which we'll say it on this show, is Elior Yaakov. And if someone wants to learn about his identity, go to Richard's Silverstein website, and he posted his picture, his identity. And I think his identity should be shown to the entire world, because he's a murderer and he's going to get promoted and he's going to go back on the street to do what? Just again, kill again.
Murder. I think they should send that piece of information to the International Criminal Court while they're at it, Jamal.
Yeah, so we have a few minutes left, Jess, but I couldn't help it. But
where do we...
man, I mean,
so you're surprised that I think Trump's going to win?
The campaign hasn't started yet, and
when you think about Robert F. Kennedy Jr.,
and I don't know about those people who are following the news of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or think about voting for him or think about he's a better alternative to Joe Biden. I don't know. What is he on? Is he on crack? Is he? I don't know. Or when he speaks, he doesn't take his medication. So, a couple of weeks ago, or 3-4 weeks ago, we talked about him. If you remember when,
right,
he accused Roger Waters, famous Roger Waters from Pink Floyd. After he praised him, first he praised him. He said he admired, and then somebody whispered something in his ears, and then he went on saying that Israel's critics are applying a double standard just days after praising him for combating the high priest of the totalitarian orthodoxies. This is what he said. And then he went turned against him, and he said that Rajas applied a different standard to judging Israel than they would be judging Arab countries. And of course, Arab countries are not occupying Israel or other countries, I think, at least. And then I think that
they don't get that money, and they don't get that kind of money, except for Egypt, maybe. But they don't get that kind of money.
And then he lectures Roger and said, "You've crossed a line there, and I don't think that Roger does that," and blah blah blah. So okay, that passed. Then I was like scrolling through my Twitter, and then I see him speaking again, sitting in a restaurant in the Upper East Side in Manhattan. And he's basically, I don't have all the exact quotes, but I'm sure millions of people have seen it. And he basically dished out a wild COVID-19 conspiracy theory this week. And the press was with him. This was a press event, just wasn't like a social event. So a press event in the Upper East Side restaurant, claiming that he calls COVID the bug was a genetically engineered bioweapon that may have been ethnically targeted to spare Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese people.
That's the craziest freaking thing I've ever heard in my life. And listen, Jamal, I've heard a lot of crazy things in my life, but I'd have to rank that as in the top 10 of the craziest things I've ever heard in my life. I mean, this is kind of like where we're headed in terms of the campaign for the presidency here in the United States in 2024. On the one hand, you have Donald Trump, who is calling for, with some Republicans, the defunding of the FBI and the DOJ. Really, really, really crazy stuff. And then you have RFK Jr., who's coming up with these anti-Semitic, racist kind of theories about COVID-19 transmission, which are truly, truly bizarre. And that's kind of where we're headed right now, Jamal. And here's the interesting thing. RFK Jr. is running as a Democrat, but do you know who's really contributing to his campaign? It's Republicans. He's really appealing to large numbers of, kind of out there Republicans. It's kind of interesting.
Well, he's appealing to the anti-vaxxers. We know that. I mean, because he's always been kind of like an anti-vaxxer and said some kooky stuff. But this is the kookiest. I don't think...
It's pretty kooky.
I mean, aside from this, even... is it scientifically possible to engineer something that will say... like the flu, let's say, let's talk about it. And it's going to only target black people and might target gay people and might target brown people and so forth. Can you do that? Can science do something like this? Maybe I'm ignorant, but this guy is a kook and he's out of... And the fact of the matter, here he goes, why does he exclude Ashkenazi Jews? Not all Jews, by the way, because, Mizrahi Jews are like, they have basically the same genetic DNA like people from the Middle East, everybody like Arabs and so forth. And I don't know, man, this is...
It's kind of crazy, Jamal, but what I will say to you and all of our listeners and viewers, welcome to the United States. Welcome to the presidential election of 2024. Kookiness is going to reign. And people are saying, oh, Biden is too old, this or that. Okay, maybe he's old. I don't know about too old, but yeah, he's old. But you're putting him against like really wacky conspiracy theorists like a Donald Trump, like an RFK Jr. And, all I got to say, man, is get your seatbelts on because it's going to be a crazy year and a half.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you next week.